Storm decks, I think the easiest way to build around them, like really all you want to do is chain together a bunch of spells and you win the game. It almost doesn't matter what you're casting, but the spells that make treasures, like Seize the Spoils and Big Score and Unexpected Windfall, these are some of the best cards in a Prismari Storm style deck, because if you can cast a few spells and then Unexpected Windfall to discard a card, to draw 2 cards and make 2 treasures, and copy that like 3 or 4 or 5 times, they turn into rituals too, right? Where you're making 10 mana, 20 mana of treasures for a 4 mana spell, and you're drawing cards along the way, a huge amount of cards because you copy it a bunch of times. So that's the direction I would go. Plus, you know, Mana Geyser, rituals, any cheap cantrips, card draw, just any sort of Storm style stuff is going to be ridiculous with this. And in Commander, there's a huge upside to this card, which is you get to play it in the command zone. In a 1,000-year Storm in the command zone is a absolutely ridiculous idea. So Prismari, I don't think it's really designed to be a standard card, although we will definitely against the odds it. But in Commander, I think this card is going to be one of the more popular Is It Spellslinger Storm style commanders. We also got our Simic Elder Dragon, and this one's really good. Quandrix the Proof. It's a 6 mana 6/6 flying trampler, so already very good flying trampling stats. And then it has Cascade. So when you cast it, you reveal cards from the top of your deck. You hit a non-land, you get your mana value, you get to cast it for free. And then instants and sorceries you cast from your hand have Cascade. So Quandrix, I think this card could be standard playable. We've seen Trumpeting Carnosaur see play in standard. It's a 6-drop with Discover 5, essentially the same thing as Cascade, sort of updated fixed Cascade. We've seen Anti-Casual Vestige see some play, which also kind of has a similar pseudo, not Cascade, but a 6-drop that puts a thing into play kind of ability with a big body. So I think that Quandrix, especially considering it's in Simic, which is a color that is really, really good at ramping into it, is going to be very powerful. Imagine just like Lesson from Lifing into Quandrix, and then casting another Lesson from Life, and cascading and putting more stuff into play. It is going to get out of hand super, super quick. The one thing I did want to mention about it is we've seen other cards that give things Cascade, like the first Sliver gives all your Slivers Cascade. The important difference with Quandrix is it only gives instants and sorceries you cast from your hand Cascade. So you can't do the trick of First Sliver where you like cast a First Sliver and it cascades into a Sliver, and that Sliver cascades into another Sliver, and that cascades into another Sliver. If you Quandrix and Cascade and hit an instant, you're not going to be able to cascade off of that instant because you didn't cast it from your hand. But that's a pretty small thing. It's still just giving all your instants and sorceries Cascade. It's something we've just never seen before in Magic. So where do we play this card? Outside of just ramping into it, I saw recently someone playing this weird mixture of like a Microform Harmonizer Landfall deck mixed with a Lesson stack. In Quandrix, it is another one of those cards that you're going to want to have a bunch of instants in your deck, but you're probably also going to want to have, or sorceries, but you're probably also going to want to have threats to cascade into. So I think it's going to be a balancing act. If you just cascade into more card draw, into more ramp spells, you're not really making that much progress. I mean, I love drawing cards, I'm not going to complain, but I think you want a mixture where putting some threats into play along with casting spells to trigger it. So in Standard, it seems very easy to ramp into. You got Badgermole Cub, you got Shared Roots, you got Lessons from Life, so I think you just turbo into this and cast it and cascade into something big, and then every instant sorcery cast in the future is going to do the same thing. In Commander, I almost don't like this card. I almost think this card, it might be one of those boring Simic commanders that just does the Simic thing too well. So Simic commander decks are about 2 things, which is green ramp spells that tend to be sorceries to ramp into stuff and get a bunch of mana in play, and then blue, and also green now, card draw spells to refill your hand. And Quandrix just rewards you for doing what you were going to do anyway. Like, all of your Shared Roots and Rampant Growths and Open the Ways are going to ramp you into Quandrix, and then they're going to start cascading once you have a Quandrix. So it gives these ramp spells that get bad in the late game more value as the game goes along. The same is true of card draw spells. You want to be playing them in your Simic deck anyway. You ramp into them, you draw a bunch of cards to refill. If you have a Quandrix out, now you're going to be cascading for even more value as you're casting your card draw spells. So in some ways, even though it doesn't work the same way, Quandrix reminds me a little bit of like Sai or Tetyova, these commanders that are very, very popular and very, very powerful, but they reward you for doing what Simic wants to do anyway, which is just casting those random card draw spells, which sometimes makes them a little boring. But I think that Quandrix, the Cascade part of it, is intriguing and it is different, and I do like this card, but I do think it's going to be like sort of a generic-y Simic-style commander deck, because it just feels like you don't have to do much work to build around it, because all the ramp spells and card draw spells are going to trigger it anyway. But this card, I think it's got standard potential. We know Cascade is busted, its stats are really good, and its ability is strong. Finally, we have maybe the most intriguing of the Elder Dragons, and the cheapest of the Elder Dragons, Silver Quill the Disputed. So this is a 4-mana 4/4 Elder Dragon. It's an Orzhov, or Silver Quill. It is flying in Vigilance, so kind of a Sarah Angel, and it says each instant and sorcery spell you cast has casualty 1. So as you cast the spell, you can sack a creature with power 1 or greater. If you do, you get to copy that spell. So Silver Quill, kind of like Orzhov and Hilo the Painter, if you've ever seen a new Hilo commander deck, except honestly better in a lot of ways, because in Hilo, only works for the first instant sorcery each turn, and it has casualty 2 rather than casualty 1. Being casualty 1 rather than casualty 2 is actually a huge deal, because it means things that make 1/1 tokens when you cast a spell are going to work with Silver Quill when they won't work with Hilo. But if you like Hilo style shenanigans, Silver Quill mostly does that, but better, but in a weirder color combination. So what do we do with this card in Standard? So in Standard, I think maybe the best home for this, as weird as it sounds, is some sort of Sephiroth style sacrifice deck. So if you're playing like a Sephiroth style sack deck, you already want to sack creatures, so the casualty ability is going to be an upside because it's going to trigger your Sephiroth or whatever. And then what I'm envisioning is you do the normal Sephiroth game plan, you get down a Silver Quill, and then you cast your game-ending Raise the Past, right, to reanimate a whole bunch of stuff. Then you're going to sack and trigger all the Blood Artists a bunch of times. But with Silver Quill, you don't need that big of a Raise the Past, because what you can do is cast the first Raise the Past, casualty something to put another copy on the stack before the second copy resolves. But after the first one resolves, sack your entire board to Umbral Collar Zealot. You get a whole bunch of the Blood Artist triggers and Sephiroth triggers, and then the second Raise the Past to resolve and reanimate everything again. So it opens up some really cool shenanigans, and that doesn't even include just like, you can cast a removal spell and sacrifice the thing you want to sack anyway to get 2 removal spells instead of 1, or a card draw spell or whatever, a village rice to draw a bunch of cards. So I think in a set style deck where casualtying away your creatures is an upside, Silver Quill actually seems kinda busted. We also know that pests are returning. We saw this on a new uncommon, Luin Exchange Student, that pest tokens are gonna be a Golgari thing. Pests, since they gain new life when they die, tend to be really good sacrifice fodder, so maybe there's some sort of like Abzan Pest Silver Quill casualty style deck. You could also play this in some sort of control deck. Like, control has the best things to copy. Like, 2 Jeskai Revelations is busted. 2 Stock Ups is very good. The challenge with control is, what are you going to have to casualty? But I think Fountain Port might be the answer to that, where you can use Fountain Port to make 1/1 tokens, get down your Silver Quill, where Harple's just sounds, and make things, which are 1. So kind of a Sarah Angel, right? When the Ram spells and card draw spells busted, its stats are really good and its ability is strong. Finally, we have maybe the most intriguing of the Elder Dragons and the cheapest of the Elder Dragons, Silver Quill the Disputed. So this is a 4-mana 4/4 Elder Dragon. It's an Orzhov, or Silver Quill. It is flying in Vigilance, so kind of a Sarah Angel, and it says each instant and sorcery spell you cast has casualty 1. So as you cast the spell, you can sack a creature with power 1 or greater. If you do, you get to copy that spell. So Silver Quill, kind of like Orzhov and Hilo the Painter, if you've ever seen an Hilo commander deck, except honestly better in a lot of ways, because in Hilo, only works for the first instant sorcery each turn, and it has casualty 2 rather than casualty 1. Being casualty 1 rather than casualty 2 is actually a huge deal, because it means things that make 1/1 tokens when you cast a spell are going to work with Silver Quill when they won't work with Hilo. But if you like Hilo style shenanigans, Silver Quill mostly does that, but better, but in a weirder color combination. So what do we do with this card in Standard? So in Standard, I think maybe the best home for this, as weird as it sounds, is some sort of Sephiroth style sacrifice deck. So if you're playing like a Sephiroth style sack deck, you already want to sack creatures, so the casualty ability is going to be an upside because it's going to trigger your Sephiroth or whatever. And then what I'm envisioning is you do the normal Sephiroth game plan, you get down a Silver Quill, and then you cast your game-ending Raise the Past, right, to reanimate a whole bunch of stuff. Then you're going to sack and trigger all the Blood Artists a bunch of times. But with Silver Quill, you don't need that big of a Raise the Past, because what you can do is cast the first Raise the Past, casualty something to put another copy on the stack before the second copy resolves. But after the first one resolves, sack your entire board to Umbral Collar Zealot to get a whole bunch of the Blood Artist triggers and Sephiroth triggers, and then the second Raise the Past to resolve and reanimate everything again. So it opens up some really cool shenanigans, and that doesn't even include just like, you can cast a removal spell and sacrifice the thing you want to sack anyway to get 2 removal spells instead of 1, or a card draw spell or whatever, a village rice to draw a bunch of cards. So I think in a set style deck where casualtying away your creatures is an upside, Silverquill actually seems kinda busted. We also know that pests are returning. We saw this on a new uncommon, Luin Exchange Student, that pest tokens are gonna be a Golgari thing. Pests, since they gain you life when they die, tend to be a really good sacrifice fodder, so maybe there's some sort of like Abzan Pest Silverquill casualty style deck. You could also play this in some sort of control deck. Like, control has the best things to copy. Like, 2 Jeskai Revelations is busted. 2 Stock Ups is very, very good. The challenge with control is, what are you going to have to casualty? But I think Fountain Port might be the answer to that, where you can use Fountain Port to make 1/1 tokens, get down your Silverquill, and then it doesn't take many double Jeskai Revelations to close out the game. The other thing this card works really, really well with, which I kind of hinted at earlier, is things that make tokens when you cast spells. So if you have a Monastery Mentor, or in standard Kuja, or Sedgemoor Witch, works when you copy spells as well, so it double triggers with Casualty, Young Pyromancer. If you get these down, as you're casting your spells, you're making these 1/1 tokens, and then you can sack those 1/1 tokens to double up your spells, to make even more creatures, and then you make even more spells and more creatures, and you just have this huge turn where you cast a bunch of spells and have endless bodies to sacrifice for Casualty. Also very good with things that make tokens, like Spectral Procession, or Lingering Souls, or Gather the Townsfolk, that put 2 or 3 bodies into play. They give you bodies you can sack to the Silverquill, but you can also double them up to make even more bodies with the Silverquill. So this card, there's so many ways to build around it, and at 4 mana, it actually seems kind of realistic to get it on the battlefield. As far as Commander is concerned, I think you do a lot of the things we were talking about, where you're making the tokens, doubling the tokens, you're playing the Monastery Mentors to make more 1/1s for the casualty, but then you just add in these big finishing spells, like Torment of Hailfire, Exsanguinate, or these big token makers like White Sun Zenith, where you can sacrifice your random 1/1s to copy them, and use those as finishers to close out the game. So Silverquill the Disputant, man, it's very tough, but I think there's an argument that this might be the best of the new Elder Dragons, at least for 60 card formats, and in some ways it's the most intriguing of them to build around. Like, I think that the Simic one, the Quandrix one, is really good, right? It's obviously busted in Commander, but it's a little bit boring to me. Even the Storm one, that's very strong. In the Command Zone, you got a 1,000-Year Storm that's obviously busted, but still, I know to build around 1,000-Year Storm. Silverquill, though. Silverquill does something that's pretty unique, and it's got the brewing juices flowing, so I'm definitely excited to brew around this card in 60 card formats and in Commander too. We also got a couple of new Planeswalkers in the set, starting with a brand new Planeswalker character in Professor Dalian Fel. And this card is a very old school Planeswalker. Like, other than having 4 abilities, this looks exactly like a Planeswalker they would have made in like 2016, 2015, like the peak of the Gatewatch era. So Professor Dalian Fel, 4 mana Golgari, 5 loyalty Planeswalker, +2, you gain 3 life. Not super exciting, but it is a lot of loyalty. If you +2 right away, it goes up to 7 loyalty. 0, you draw a card and lose a life. -3, destroy target creature. -6, you get an emblem with whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life, which obviously is a narrow emblem, where if you're not in a deck with life gain, it doesn't really do anything, but if you are in a deck that has life gain effects, it can be a very effective way to close out the game. So Professor Dalian Fel, it's basically, literally, Ob Nixilis reignited. Like, this is back to the cookie cutter Planeswalker era. Like, look at these abilities. Yeah, you get a +2, gain some life, but draw a card and lose a life, pretty much the same. -3, destroy a creature, pretty much the same. An emblem that will win you the game eventually, probably pretty much the same. So this reminds me so much of Ob Nixilis, and Ob Nixilis actually saw play back in its era, although the current era isn't as Planeswalker friendly, so I'm not really sure. It is notable that Dalen's a whole mana less, although it is in 2 colors in Ob Nixilis, but I think that Professor Dalian, I want this card to be good. This seems like a very solid mid-range card to me, and I think it at least has uses in Standard. So its emblem, obviously, is a Sanguine Bond, and Sanguine Bond has lots of potential for combos. We've seen it combo up with Exquisite Blood time and time again, so in the right deck, it is a very devastating combo piece. So where do we actually play this card in Standard? We'll answer one, and I feel like this is going to come up a lot in spoiler season, because Standard right now is kind of Badger Mold Cub decks versus Izzet decks for the most part, but you can ramp into this with Badger Mold Cub, start drawing cards, start blowing up creatures. Golgari Golgari isn't the most popular Badger Mold colors, but I think in a Golgari Badger Mold deck, and they do exist, I think worst case Professor Dalienfeld, great sideboard card, right, that you can bring in to generate card advantage against the control decks. If your opponent sweeps away your board or deals with all your Badger Mold Cubs, well, at least you got this card advantage engine to rebuild. It also could show up in straight up Golgari midrange, which is like a tier C deck. Like, it's pretty far down the rankings at the moment. But if we end up in a world where midrange is good again, I could see Professor Dalienfeld be very, very good there. Even get like Lifelink from Elegy Acolyte to work with the life gain synergies. The other possibility is, we know from past Strixhaven, and from the little bit we've seen from Secrets of Strixhaven, is that Witherbloom, or Golgari, is about life gain. Their whatever mascot common is Pest Mascot, which is essentially an Ajani's Pride mate for 1 more mana, but you get Trample out of it. So this is a card that might be even better once we see the rest of what Golgari has to offer in this set, because if there's a bunch of crazy life gain synergies, then that +2 of gain 3 life, rather than being like, okay, that's pretty mediocre, might actually be pretty exciting. The emblem that you get to in a single turn of plussing and get to keep the Professor around will be much more exciting if there's this crazy Witherbloom life gain deck that we get out of Streaks of Strixhaven itself. The emblem, as I mentioned before, it is a combo piece. It's actually the same thing that Enduring Tenacity does, and also Southwind Avatar does. But if you have Bloodthirsty Conqueror, whenever your opponent loses life, you gain that much life, and you have Professor Dalienfeld's emblem, where whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life, and then anyone loses life or gains life, you start an infinite loop where Professor Dalienfeld triggers Bloodthirsty Conqueror, which triggers Professor Dalienfeld, which triggers Bloodthirsty Conqueror, until your opponent dies. This isn't something new, because we could already do this in Standard with Enduring Tenacity and Southwind Avatar, but Professor Dalienfeld gives us card draw to draw into the combo, so it might be worth re-evaluating this combo for Standard once we get the rest of Secrets of Strixhaven. I think the floor for this card in Standard is basically Ral Crackling Wit. If you see how Ral Crackling Wit sees play, it sees play in a very popular archetype, right? Is it? But it's not a main deck card for the most part. It's typically like a 2 of in the sideboard, and if you run into the grindy matchups, the control decks, and you need a source of card advantage, you need a repeatable value engine, then you bring in Ral Crackling Wit. I think the floor of Professor Dalienfeld is very similar to that, where you play this in the sideboard of like a Golgari midrange deck, or a Golgari Badger Mold Cub deck, or some 4-color Badger Mold Pyro or whatever, and you bring it in those grindy matchups. It's just a way you can keep drawing cards and killing things. So I think that's the floor for Professor Dalienfeld. And like I said before, if we get the right pieces in Secrets of Strixhaven, it could even be a very good main deck card. Our second Planeswalker is Return of Ral. Is Ral Zarek Guest Lecture, and this card is weird. Not like how it plays is weird, but we have a mono black Ral Zarek, and there's also, if you notice, if you look closely at the pack version, the base version of Ral Zarek, there's this weird watermark on the card. Here is my little theory. So we know we're going to Reality Fracture. We know it's going to be innovative and weird. We've seen these hints about some sort of like alternate reality happening, some sort of color shift thing happening. I think that watermark is going to be the watermark of some sort of alternate reality that we're entering into with Reality Fracture, where we are going to see a bunch of very iconic characters show up in colors we are not used to, like Mono Black Ral Zarek. So essentially, I think this card is a plant for the future that's showing us where we're heading with Reality Fracture, and I am really excited for it, because I love Planar Chaos, one of my all-time favorite sets. And if this is a less color pride breaky version of Planar Chaos that we're getting in Reality Fracture, this set is going to be absolutely awesome. So Ral Zarek itself. Unfortunately, the card kind of sucks. It's a 3-minute Planeswalker, +1 Surveil 2, -1, any number of target players each discard a card, -2, return target creature card with mana 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, -7, flip 5 coins, target opponent skips their next X turns, where X is the number of coins that came up head. So, as I mentioned before, the jarring part about this is it's a mono black Ral, and every other Ral has been in Izzet, so it's a pretty huge shift color-wise, although I will say it's pretty cute that the ultimate of the new black Ral is essentially an inverted black version of the original Ral's ultimate, where the original Ral, for -7, you flip 5 coins, and you take an extra turn for each one that comes up heads. The new one essentially does the same thing in a 1v1 game, where if you make your opponent skip that number of turns, that's really the same as you taking those extra turns. So very sweet callback to the original Ral Zarek. But as far as Ral Zarek Guest Lecture, here's my problem with the card. And I hope the card is good, but I don't think we live in the era where just being a 3-mana Planeswalker makes the card good anymore. That might have been true 10-15 years ago, but I don't think it's true in 2026. So if we look at these abilities, +1 you Surveil 2, fine little value-y mechanic, but, you know, not game-breaking or anything. The -1, it's, I don't know, kind of like Liliana the Veil's discard, except you can choose not to discard yourself. So it can be kind of like a Davriel discard that is not as capped as Davriel, but maybe you want to discard because the -2 is essentially an Earth, which is probably the most powerful node on Ral Zarek. And then the ultimate, as we talked about before, is essentially Ral Zarek's ultimate from the original Ral Zarek. So why do I think this card might be not that great? And the answer is, it doesn't protect itself at all. Traditionally, strong Planeswalkers protect themselves. They kill something, they put money on the battlefield to block with, and I just don't see that in Ral Zarek. Like, Surveil doesn't protect it. Making your opponent discard is nice, but it doesn't protect it. I guess the -2, in the right scenario where you have like something good to reanimate, could protect it by getting you a blocker, but then it also goes down to 1 loyalty, so it still dies to a couple like Earthbend lands or something, even through the blocker. So I just don't see this card protecting itself, which makes me a little skeptical that it's actually going to be that good. Like, Planeswalkers that don't protect themselves have a pretty high bar to get over, and Planeswalkers in general have a pretty high bar to get over in our super fast 2026 standard. So I think being able to reanimate like an Abhorrent Oculus, like Helping Hands, maybe that's the direction. Maybe this is like a value piece and you're not planning on this sitting out and generating long-term value, but you're planning on like playing it 1 turn, discarding an Abhorrent Oculus, reanimating it the next turn, and Ral Zarek did its job. Like, maybe that's what you do, is you don't think about this as a long game Planeswalker, but almost like a short burst, generate value right away type Planeswalker. So maybe there's a shell like that could make it work. I could also see trying it in the discard deck. We still have Bandit Scale in Standard, which is kind of our rat style reward for making your opponent discard all their cards. The -1 does work pretty well there. You play this and just tick down 3 times in a row to make your opponent discard 3 cards. Maybe throw in a Surveil in between and you can tick down an additional time, so maybe it could work in a discard style deck. But Ral Zarek Guest Lecture, I think the big takeaway from this card is the watermark, the color shift, all that stuff. I think this card means a lot for where we're heading in future Magic sets, and I'm really excited for it. But as far as the card itself, I actually think this one might be a flop, but I don't know. Let me know if you're wrong. I see people excited about this card, so if you think I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. But I just can't get past the fact that it seems so bad at protecting itself that I feel like you just play this, and it's just gonna die within a turn or two pretty much every time, and I don't know if that's worth it for 3 mana these days. We also got a new Black Wrath at Mythic, and this one's pretty straightforward in Withering Curse. So Withering Curse, it's a 3-mana sorcery. It says all creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn, but it has a new mechanic, Infusion. And Infusion means I do something even more busted if you gain life this turn. So if you gain life this turn, instead of giving all creatures -2/-2, you destroy all creatures instead. So Withering Curse, it's essentially like a Malicious Eclipse that upgrades into a painless Toxic Deluge if you gain life during the turn. And I think this card is very, very, very good. So first in Standard, just a -2/-2 mode is very good against a lot of the best decks. It gets most of the Badger Mold Cup deck. So it gets all the threats out of the Prowess decks. They're just making all these 1/1s and all these Slickshot show-offs. And these are the most played decks in the format right now. So I think the fact that the -2/-2 mode is going to be good a decent amount of the time if you can't gain life during the turn is really what puts this card over the top. I think for sure this card sees sideboard play, and if you can reasonably gain life, like maybe you play a Jungle Hollow and gain a little life, and you can turn this into a real Wrath, then this is insane. Like, current Standard is so fast, I actually think a 3-mana Wrath is probably what we need. And this is a 3-mana Wrath with some hoops to jump through. You gotta gain the life to make it work, but I think it's gonna be worth it. Plus, remember, as we were talking about before, Witherbloom, all about gaining life, pest tokens, the new Planeswalkers, Professor Dalienfell. We do have a lot of ways to gain life, so I think this card is built to be very good in a Golgari style deck, but I think it's even better than that because even if you can't gain life consistently, it's still gonna be good enough in most matchups. As far as Commander is concerned, this card is very, very straightforward. In Commander, giving all creatures -2/-2 is not very good. It actually is just not impactful enough to put in a Commander deck. However, if you were a life gain deck, a 3-mana Wrath that doesn't cost you life like Toxic Deluge is absolutely bonkers. So I think this is a staple for any sort of life gain deck. Unplayable for decks that are not gaining life, But if you're playing Dina, or like Frodo, or Oloro, just sitting in the command zone getting you life each turn, or Zoraline, or like Carrick texting to gain a bunch of life to make up for all their Carrick life loss, if you're playing something that gains life, I think this is one of the best Wraths. I think it is literally alongside Toxic Deluge as tied for the best Wrath in Commander. Maybe Toxic Deluge is still a little bit ahead, even though you lose life, you get rid of indestructible things, but it is in that tier, like the best Wrath in your black deck in Commander tier. But to even want to play it, you gotta have life gain synergies in your deck. So Withering Curse kind of makes me a little salty to see a Malicious Eclipse style card, or even a Toxic Deluge style card, show up as a mythic. But the card is undoubtedly very, very powerful, and it should see a lot of play in Standard and in life gain decks. Our last mythic for the day is one of my favorites, Improvisation Capstone. So this is a 7 mana Lesson Sorcery. It says exile cards from the top of your library until you exile the total mana value of 4 or greater. You can cast any number of spells from among them without paying their mana cost. So that part, okay, it's fine. Like, you cast it for 7, you get at least 4 mana value worth of spells. If you get lucky and get like 1 drop, 10 drop, then you'd have like 12 mana value worth of spells. So you could get your mana value worth out of it, but by itself, that's not that exciting. The exciting part about this card is the new mechanic Paradigm. So Paradigm says, then exile this spell. After you first resolve a spell with this name, you may cast a copy of it from exile without paying its mana cost at the beginning of each of your first main phases. So essentially what that clunky line of text is saying is the first one of these you resolve, it goes to exile, and you get to cast it again for free at the beginning of each of your first main phases, which means this is essentially the return of Epic. If you don't remember Epic, there were 5 cards in Saviors of Kamigawa. They had the Epic mechanic, and Epic was you cast this spell, you get to copy it at the beginning of your turn for the rest of the game, but you can't cast other spells for the rest of the game. And in Mark Rosewasser's teaser for this set, he mentioned that an old mechanic was returning, but without the drawback. And it's gotta be this. Paradigm is quite literally Epic without the downside of not being able to cast other spells. So as far as Capstone itself, there's not a perfect comparison for this card. It's kind of like a Dream Harvest, but it hits yourself instead of each of your opponents. A little bit like Ignite the Future, which if you flash it back, you get to Impulse Draw and cast 3 of those things for free. Essentially, it's free value each turn. It just seems like, man, so fun to have this card hanging out in exile. So every turn you know you're going to get that free value of drawing extra cards. You don't have to worry. Like, even if your opponent counters it, it's just going to happen again next turn anyway. So what do you really care? It just seems like such a great thing to have Paradigmed. As far as Standard's concerned, I don't think this is designed to really be like a super strong Standard card.